I'd like to welcome everybody to the CSG East Energy and Environment Committee meeting, and thank you for joining us. I'm Rona Cohen, Energy and Environment Program Manager, and we have a really exciting session planned today. And I just want to alert everyone that we are recording this session and it will be available on our website later this week. And I'd also like to give a shout out to my colleagues who are at the controls to make sure that things run smoothly today. And that's Eve Workington and Dylan McDowell. And now I'm really pleased to turn things over to our Energy and Environment Committee co-chair, Connecticut State Senator Paul Formica. Senator Formica is serving his third term in the Connecticut State Senate, where he is the Deputy Senate Republican leader, as well as ranking member of the Appropriations Committee and of the Energy and Technology Committee. Senator Formica has brought to CSG a wealth of experience and a deep commitment to improving Connecticut's and the region's energy policy as we transition to a renewable energy future. Senator Formica, I thank you for your leadership, and I turn it over to you.
Good morning, all. Thank you, Rona, very much, and thank you and your team for all that you're doing to, to bring us live to everybody for this discussion today, and certainly many of the other discussions that CSG is going to have. So we all appreciate that. I'd like to welcome everyone to this discussion today. We have, I believe, a very interesting and timely discussion, to present to you today and with you. We're looking for some feedback and questions and answers and discussions. As you know, there are many challenges in energy and technology these days, facing all of us who are interested in working in this sector, in this field, with weather and aging infrastructures, higher costs, utility modernization, transition from previous generation to renewables, and upgrading technologies like storage, locating sources on or offshore, and regional collaboration efforts. All of those things that I find so vital in participating with CSG, because regionally and together we're going to solve these problems much easier and much more efficiently, I believe, than if we take it one county, one state, one province, one district at a time. So I hope you'll find this morning's discussion enlightening. And I would like to introduce the Dean of, I think, not only CSG, but the Dean of Massachusetts Senate, my good friend and colleague, co-chair Senator Pacheco. As I said, he is the Dean of the Massachusetts Senate, having represented first Plymouth and Bristol District as state senator since 1993. He has supported initiatives to foster local and global economic partnerships and secure a clean energy future. And I could go on and on with all of the things the good senator is involved in. And he has been a wealth of knowledge and certainly a great resource and benefit to me as I make my way through helping out in what little I can do for this committee. So I'd like to introduce Senator Pacheco for a few opening remarks.
Thank you very, very much, Senator Formica, for your leadership and your work on this committee. It's been a pleasure to work with you, and our work together is a true bipartisan effort, looking at the issues that face us in our respective states and throughout the Northeast. It's an exciting time for all of us that have the opportunity and the privilege to represent our constituents and to try to come up with solutions to solve the challenges that face all of us today, in particular in energy and dealing with climate. I'm particularly pleased to see so many on the call today from throughout the Northeast. It is extremely important to deal with this, the integration of renewable energy technology and how we're going to move forward together. So this report that we'll be hearing about today is extremely important. And I think everyone will finish this session with a lot of new knowledge that we can bring back to our committees and the work that we do. And I would urge everyone today as well to tune back in at noontime for the program that we will have with our special speaker of the day, Tony Sieber. We had Tony with us at CSG a few years ago. He was a bit controversial, but let me tell you that most of his predictions are coming true. So I would urge you to be with us at noontime to find out what his predictions are in the area of transportation and farming and energy. They're amazing. Finally, I just want to thank our leader here at CSG. She's on the staff, but she's really our leader. And Senator Famika would agree with me. I'm sure Rona Cohen and all of her staff and all of the staff at CSG for helping us get through the technology challenges that we're facing, and also the significant amount of research that Rona does, keeping us up to speed on everything that is taking place. So I want to thank you so much, Rona, all the staff, and I also want to ask all those members that are on today, those that are interested in climate policy and the energy and environmental policy, please let Rona know, and let my office or Senator Famika's office know if you're interested in getting notifications for the new CSG U.S. State Legislative Climate Alliance that we're also working on to put on programs like this for all of us in the future. So thank you very much, and let's find out about this North American study.
Thank you, Senator, and couldn't agree more with your comment about our fearless leader up there. So listen, an interesting discussion today. I expect and hope to have participation, questions, and conversations at the end. We have the chat room open, and Rona will be monitoring that, helping me as I try to moderate my way through this and make sure that I get to everyone. If you have a question, you want to put it in the chat, we'll try to incorporate it in the discussion. If you want to have time after the presentation, I believe we'll have 20 minutes or half an hour or so to have a conversation and do live question and answers if you want to weigh in that way. The North American electric power system is undergoing significant changes as it integrates increasing quantities of renewable resources. And these changes are expected to accelerate amid ambitious federal, state, local, and corporate decarbonization goals. Greg Brinkman is an expert in power systems modeling and renewables integration with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. He studies the impacts of variable renewable generation on the electric power system, primarily focused on the highly renewable penetration scenarios and the enabling technologies and operational practices that allow for efficient integration of variable renewables. He has a PhD from the University of Colorado and recently completed the North American Renewable Integration Study, on which he will give us a presentation and will be the basis for his discussion today. So I am very pleased to welcome to CSG and the Energy Committee, Greg Brinkman. Thank you, sir, and welcome.
Thanks, Senator Famika. So I believe, yeah, as you mentioned, we'll have plenty of time for discussion a little bit later, and I'll try to keep my introduction to the study relatively brief. If there are like quick clarifying questions, would we be able to take those during the presentation, or?
If you know, perhaps something in the chat might be the easiest way to do that, so we don't interrupt the flow. But why don't we play it by ear, and we'll try to get everybody included and get get as much of your information out there and clarified as possible.
Great, that sounds good. I just lost my Zoom window. Can you guys still hear me?
I can see you and hear you.
Okay, great. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
I can see
Yes.
it. Yeah.
Wow, magic. Oh, there you are. I see you again. Okay, well, thanks a lot for having me. I'll talk today, as Senator Formica mentioned, about the North American Renewable Integration Study. Give some relatively brief introduction and save most of the time for discussion for later. So please feel free to be ready with questions. The North American Renewable Integration Study was a state-of-the-art analysis of the North American power system. We are looking at long-term pathways and different ways that the power system can evolve in North America through the year 2050. And we're studying timescales from those multi-decadal timescales all the way down to 5-minute time resolution in some of our modeling. The scenarios that we studied were informed by the mid-century strategy targets from the Paris Agreement. So those are in general in the neighborhood of 80% carbon reduction for the US, for example, and a little bit higher for Canada. So these are not the 100% scenarios, carbon reduction scenarios that are sometimes being talked about today. So I just wanted to clarify that up front. Some of the things that we're looking at studying in detail here are the operational feasibility of these high penetration scenarios, the impacts of weather variability and uncertainty, the potential value of enabling technologies and operating practices, including flexible operation of hydropower, thermal generation, transmission, interchange, and cooperation between regions, and storage. Some of them, I think, talking about the motivations behind the study is probably not too necessary with this crowd, but to cover it real quickly, North America is very diverse in terms of both energy resources and also in terms of demand. There's a variety of time zones and demand. People are demanding electricity at different times in different places on the grid. And there's different types of technologies available at different times at different places. And that resource, that diverse resource, a modern power system can help take advantage of that and provide reliable, affordable, and sustainable power. The North American grid is really big. It's the engine behind over 1/4 of the world's economy and makes up almost 1/4 of the capacity and generation worldwide. Some of the goals of the study, some of our goals are to help inform some of the stakeholders, but also enable stakeholders to deepen their understanding by providing tools and methods and data to the community. But some of the questions that we're trying to answer and inform are trying to understand how reliable and affordable the grid can be, what sort of operating practices and technologies can potentially help the most in terms of reaching these levels of carbon reduction. How robust are the solutions? Do we take home different conclusions in different scenarios? And one of the key questions of the study is, what's the potential benefit of inter-regional and international cooperation? So I noticed we have a few Canadian folks on the call too, so I'll try to speak to that some. I'm not going to get into too much detail about the types of modeling that we've done, but we've exercised a variety of different models on understanding a variety of different scenarios for the North American grid. We have detail in transmission for our model for some of the scenarios down to a nodal level of detail, modeling over 100,000 nodes on the electric power system. We have time resolution down to 5-minute time resolution. We have coverage of some of our models up to 7 years of meteorological data. And we've done 10,000 different draws of outage patterns for each hour on that sequence of 7 years. So there's a lot of horsepower behind these models. We moved around a lot of electrons and created a lot of heat ourselves from all the modeling of these scenarios. So a quick overview of the scenarios we studied. The kind of core pathways that we looked at are number one is the business as usual, which assumes that the system evolves as we plan and operate it today. This makes a framework for comparison. Number two is the low cost variable generation scenario, which assumes the same policies as business as usual, but assumes lower costs for technologies, including wind and solar. Number 3 is the carbon constrained scenario, which assumes there's overarching policies that drive significant carbon emissions reductions throughout North America. And number 4, it assumes those same policies as number 3, but it's an electrification scenario. And that assumes that in addition to the carbon reduction on the grid, we have significant additional electricity demand due to electrification of additional energy end uses, especially transportation, space heating, water heating, things like that. And Rona, I can't see the chat, so if you do see something that you think I should address, if you could let me know, that would be great. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
In addition to those 4 core scenarios, we studied a lot of additional sensitivities to understand the potential impacts or potential benefits of transmission, of cooperation between regions, different hydropower and hydrological conditions, different costs of storage, and different amounts of Canadian exports, things like that, so that we could understand the potential benefits and impacts of those things in more detail. So this is a snapshot. This is a look at the different core scenarios in the year 2050. They range from 50 to 79% renewable and 57 to 84% carbon-free generation in the year 2050. On the left there, we have sort of a near-term look at the year 2024, and this is for the US grid, and where we'll be close to 27% renewable contribution on an annual generation basis by that point in time. And the year 2050, the next 4 bars are for the year 2050, looking at the generation fraction for those 4 different core scenarios. And we see a renewable contribution of about 50% in the business as usual. So this is based only on existing state targets that are mandatory and in legislation. And then we have the low cost variable generation, which when we froze the assumptions at the end of the year 2018, this was our cost trajectory for low cost wind and solar. From today's standpoint, this looks like a much more moderate projection of wind and solar costs, and our more conservative business as usual looks more like a conservative estimate of what wind and solar will cost in the future. So that's kind of gives a little bit of context around these scenarios and how quickly these cost projections are changing for some of these technologies. And you'll notice that the low cost variable generation scenario is very, very similar in terms of grid composition to the carbon constrained scenario. So that's the scenario that has the business as usual costs, but does include some carbon reduction targets in the model. And those 2 scenarios are very similar. The composition of the grid in the electrification scenario is relatively similar to the others, but there's a whole lot more energy, electricity being used and energy being displaced from other end uses in terms of gasoline and natural gas for heating and things like that. So that's a snapshot for the USA. For Canada, obviously the bars look quite a bit different because the starting point is quite a bit different, with a very significant amount of hydropower in the Canadian grid today. The 2050 scenarios are between 90 and 95% renewable, which means between 93 and 97% carbon-free energy. So we didn't study a 100% carbon-free scenario for this study, but we get pretty darn close, as you can see over there on the right side with the electrification scenario, with just that little green sliver of gas representing all of the non-carbon-free electricity in Canada in that particular scenario. A lot of the conclusions for this study are really very similar between the US and Canada. There's not necessarily big picture different take-home messages, but as you'll see, the bars between the scenarios often look quite different because the starting point composition between the grids is quite different. So some of the key conclusions from our study, as you can probably guess from looking at the scenarios that we studied, we found that there are multiple pathways to getting 80% or more carbon reduction by the year 2050. And this graph here shows on the left the US, on the right Canada, the evolution of carbon emissions in the 4 different core scenarios. And the gray crosshatched background shows the range of all of the different scenarios and sensitivities that we studied. And you can see there's a wide variety of different trajectories, but there's a number of different ways to get to those 80+% carbon reduction levels by the year 2050. And one thing to note is, in addition to the grid composition being very similar, that low-cost VG scenario actually emits less carbon than the carbon constrained scenario all the way through to the year 2048, and it's very similar in 2050. So that's so we see that those cost reductions are driving a lot of the carbon reduction. With those low cost, the steeper cost reduction of wind and solar can lead to a faster and less costly transition. But those carbon targets can still be achieved with the conservative wind and solar cost assumptions that I mentioned earlier. And those conservative wind and solar cost assumptions in the modeling led to about a 6% total system cost increase through the year 2050 for the US. And I'll show you Canada in a second, but the number's almost the same. With the low cost wind and solar assumptions, the carbon emission reductions came at no additional cost. And actually the total system costs with those more advanced cost trajectories for wind and solar were about 16% lower compared to the business as usual. You'll see the outlier here on the right is the electrification scenario. That scenario had costs of about $2 trillion higher in the US, but that doesn't include the cost reductions from other energy end uses. So it doesn't include the cost savings from gasoline and reductions and things like that. So this is a grid only snapshot, and that $2 trillion shouldn't be directly compared to those other scenarios. And I'll move forward here to the Canadian numbers, but as you'll notice when I switch, the shape of the different scenarios looks very similar. We see similar cost reductions, similar cost increases for the the carbon constrained scenario, and overall generally the same take-home messages for Canada. The future low carbon system can balance supply and demand in a wide variety of different future conditions, with all different technologies contributing to that resource adequacy. This graph is for the US, and I should mention that we did not study the climate change impacts on meteorology that could be influencing some of the demand, that will be influencing some of the demand patterns in the year 2050, and also some of the generation patterns of not just wind and solar, but hydropower and all fossil fuel generators too, as we've seen from some recent events throughout North America. This graph here looks at the planning reserve. So this is basically the contribution of different technologies to planning reserve, or another way of thinking about that is the contribution towards the peak demand needs. And you'll see the evolution, and this is for the US through the year 2050. The dashed line is the total planning reserve need, and the solid colored lines at the bottom are the contributions of renewable plus storage. And so you can see for the year 2020 in the US, thermal resources, which includes both fossil fuel and nuclear, are contributing the vast majority of our planning reserve needs. As we evolve through the year 2050 and our peak demand needs continue to grow, the new renewables and storage that are added to the grid through the year 2050 basically take up all of the new need for planning reserves. But in these particular scenarios, the slice of the pie that thermal is contributing to is still very significant and stays pretty consistent, except for in the case where we assume low cost storage trajectory, where the thermal piece of the pie shrinks significantly as we evolve towards the year 2050. So this is not a result that says we absolutely must have all these thermal resources on the system. It's a result that says for these particular scenarios, keeping this thermal generation around for serving peak load is economically optimal. And so I'll advance the slides and show the result for Canada. You'll see that the graph looks different because we have a lot more contribution from hydropower today as a fraction of the total grid in Canada. But the general take-home message stays similar, that the piece of the pie that thermal is contributing is staying pretty consistent. This is another result that may be of interest to the folks on the call today. We found through the sensitivities that we ran that regional and international cooperation and transmission expansion can provide up to $180 billion in net system benefits through the year 2050. So this is basically the total cost savings that can result from transmission expansion between regions and between countries. When we studied exclusively the international transmission expansion, we found there was potentially $10 billion to $30 billion in benefits in the different high renewable scenarios. And the interregional and international transmission scenarios showed between $60 billion and $180 billion of benefit. And you'll also see on the right here, these green bars, that's the electrification scenario. The benefits, the potential benefits of cooperation and transmission expansion between regions is the highest consistently in that particular scenario, with the carbon constrained and the low cost variable generation being next. And so we see there's a lot of potential benefits to be had from the transmission expansion and cooperation between regions. And I suspect that'll be an interesting point for discussion later. The flexibility that's provided to the grid comes from a variety of different sources. We see it coming from transmission, as I mentioned a minute ago. We see it coming from storage and flexible operation of all different generating types, including thermal generation, natural gas, hydropower, wind, and solar. And if I can make it work, I will show you a little animation in just a second. But this is a week. So I showed a week in June here of dispatch for the US power system. I won't talk about it too much, but the slides will be available, I believe. And we've also got a week in January in the Canadian power system. The take-home messages from both, despite looking very different, are quite similar, that flexibility is coming from a variety of different sources, and the grid can balance at 5-minute resolution levels. One of the other sensitivities we studied was to understand the potential benefit, the cost benefit of hydropower flexibility. So we ran a couple sensitivities in our 5-minute dispatch model to understand how the grid could operate if there was no flexibility from the hydropower, and compared it to something that has approximately today's level of flexibility from hydropower. And we find that flexibility alone, not the energy, but the flexibility alone is worth about $2.3 billion reduction in operating costs in the 2050 grid, and that represents about 3% of the total costs on the grid. So that potential benefit from hydropower flexibility is very, very significant by the year 2050 in these scenarios. And that's for the US and Canada hydropower combined. We did this sensitivity together. So if you're interested in learning more about the study, we have a website that's linked to here. We have some data up there. We have links to all the reports and executive summaries. And we have links to a YouTube channel that has what I'd like to show you here, if I can manage to pull it off. Rona, are you seeing this map?
Yes, I see it.
This is a map animation of the dispatch for a June day in the year 2050. It looks like it says 2024. I just noticed that's a typo. I know that's correct on the YouTube channel, but I tried to pull down one here that would work smoother to show here. And when I push play, it's going to play through a day of dispatch, and the bubbles are the different generators. The size of the bubble is the amount that generator is generating. The color is the type of generation, and the arrows are transfers between regions. And over here on the right, you have a bar stack of what different types of generation are contributing in that region. And it looks like I'm starting in the middle of the day here, but I'll slide us back to midnight and push play, and we'll see absolutely nothing, apparently. Sorry about that. I'm not sure what's wrong with my player here. Let me just see if I can close it and reopen it real quick. Otherwise, we'll just give up on that, and you can see it on YouTube yourself if you're interested. Looks like it's playing correctly. No, it's not. I'm not sure what's wrong here, but yeah, so these are available online, and you can take a look at how a couple of different days evolve in these scenarios. And one thing you'll notice, like on this June day, is we have a lot of southward flow in the evenings when the sun is down, and you don't have a lot of solar. You have kind of this general south flow pattern throughout the eastern US and Canada. And then during the middle of the day, as was showing earlier randomly, we have a lot of northward flow patterns as you have some of that solar generation flowing towards the north. So that's what a typical summer day looks like. On the YouTube channel, you can, now everything's gone crazy. But on the YouTube channel, you can poke through some of those things at your leisure if you're interested. So thanks a lot for the opportunity to talk here, and I'm really interested in what some of the folks have to say in a few minutes here on some detailed projects that I know you guys have lined up.
Okay, we do. Thank you very much for that. We do have a few questions and comments in the chat box, but I just want to make sure everybody knows that this presentation is going to be available to anybody, as well as the recording of this time. So if you missed all those technical notes, then you'll still be able to access it. Rona, are we able to help with any of that movement on the video, or does that got to come from Greg's computer itself?
You know, I'm not entirely sure, but I can try it on my end and see if we have more luck. My sense is that it's a Zoom issue.
Yeah.
But I can tool with that.
Okay.
And I'll send out the links as well. And I see that Dylan has put the links in the chat box as well. Thank you, Dylan. But we can send those around so that people have them.
Yeah, it works perfectly on my screen down here, but when I drag it into the screen that I'm sharing, it stops.
I think it's probably a Zoom thing.
Yep.
Okay, so a comment from Representative Barry from Maine, who we're going to hear from in a few minutes. I think we'll go through the chats first and then have the two representatives come on. You think, Rona? Good. How is electrification not a requirement across all scenarios? In Maine, 54% of GHGs are from transportation, plus 30% building, heating, and cooling. We don't see a way forward that doesn't include massive electrification. Greg, you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I think the study shouldn't be seen as a prescription of what folks should do. You know, when we embarked on the study in 2016, actually is when we started this study, we you know, wanted to focus on the grid and the grid impacts of you know, a low carbon future, and so we wanted to study a variety of different scenarios. It became evident, you know, through the study that this electrification scenario was, you know, potentially the most likely in terms of any sort of, you know, aggressive carbon mitigation scenario. And so that's why we added that scenario in partway through the study. And I think in addition to the work we've done here, you know, there's definitely additional studies that have been done to learn more about, you know, some of the details of what an electrification future might look like. So so we definitely wanted to include that scenario, but it wasn't, you know, originally wasn't the specific goal of this particular study. We're trying to understand, you know, some of the variability and uncertainty around the renewables and how we can balance the grid with that.
Okay, Representative Barry will be with us in just a minute. Another comment from him about why hydro, you know, about hydro, and I think he can touch on that. Question from Senator David Waters of New Hampshire. What will it take to get regional grid cooperation?
Yeah, so I think that's maybe a good question for discussion. You know, there's a lot of regional cooperation going on today, inter-regional cooperation and inter-regional transmission planning has been a little bit more challenging. And so I think that's one of the things that we looked at in this study. We said, okay, there's a lot of potential value there with these, you know, major transmission flows between regions in a high renewables future. And so I think it's a discussion starter more than an answer in this study.
And I think that's going to depend on all of us. You know, we're going to have to find ways to work together using the data that you and others are supplying. And I think that's going to be an important part of working hard with CSG. What was the other one? Okay, Representative Mike Yantachaka, I hope I pronounced that close to correctly, is questioning about the cost savings of electrification. Have you included the savings from fossil fuel reduction in your chart?
No, in the chart that had the $2 trillion increase, that should not be directly compared because we have not considered the cost reductions in other sectors. I could point you to a couple of other studies that have started to take a more detailed look and a more detailed understanding of all of the potential cost trade-offs of electrification.
Okay, that'd be great. If you could make that available for us to distribute around for those people interested. Why don't we, Greg, why don't we go to Maine State Representative Seth Berry as the House Chair of the Joint Standing Committee on Energy, Utilities, and Technology. And he's going to touch base about the Central Maine Corridor proposal. You know, I was going to just say that you'll be calling in from your car, but it seems like that's clear to everyone. So I hope the technology keeps up with you, and you have about 5 minutes to kind of catch us up on what's going on in the great state of Maine, besides finding lobsters and all those things that I have interest in.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Senator, and it's great to be with you all. Thank you, Rona, and the whole team at CSG for all your great work. It's always wonderful to be able to join you. And I do want to make clear I'm joining you from my car, but not the one driving today. I just dropped my son off in college in Indiana, and we're on our way back to the Northeast. First of all, thanks for the presentation. Big fan of all the great work at NREL, and you know, really find these kinds of projections fascinating. You know, and I think every state is different. What I love about this is we're looking at things as a region, and it will have to be regional solutions, right? What I know from my work as the House Chair of the Joint Standing Committee on Energy, Utilities, and Technology in Maine is that we could decarbonize our entire electrical supply tomorrow, and we would have only solved 7% of our emissions problem in Maine, based on the accounting that we currently use. And I think, you know, we're all aware that accounting could probably use some improvements. 7% of our greenhouse gas problem is electricity. 9% is primarily combustible fuels used in industry. 30% is combustible fuels used in building heating and cooling, and 54% is transportation. So we view electrification, beneficial electrification, as a must, regardless of the supply mix going forward. And you know, I'd love to, you know, if there's time to poke and prod at that whole aspect of this further. You know, we really think we need to electrify massively, and yes, also bring on a lot more efficiency and renewable supply. Part of what Maine is debating right now, and it's a big debate in Maine, is the proposal to bring a very significant 1,200 megawatt HVDC line from Quebec through Maine to Lewiston to interconnect with the New England grid. And that is a response from our utility, Central Maine Power, and Hydro-Quebec, that they partnered with to meet the requirements of a bid from Massachusetts for 9.45 terawatt hours of renewables. I think there were something like 46 different responses to that RFP. You know, many of them included solar and wind and storage, but there were 3 that involved Hydro-Quebec, and those seem to have risen to the top of the Massachusetts list of preferences. The initial proposal was that was selected was the Hydro-Quebec line that would have come down through New Hampshire. New Hampshire, at the end of the day, decided to say no to that. And so CMP and the Maine proposal came next. It is very hotly contested in Maine right now. There are folks who are very concerned about the clear cut that would be required down through Maine's very pristine North Woods. Folks who don't trust the projections of either cost savings or tangible benefits or greenhouse gas reductions for various reasons. And then, of course, the other side, primarily the utilities in Hydro-Quebec, are saying, no, this will bring benefits to the New England grid. This will bring tangible benefits to Maine, and it's you know, something we must do for our collective economic and environmental future. I happen to be on the, I want to be up front, I happen to be on the first side of that debate. I'm not in favor of the corridor, but I'm here to try to represent both sides as even-handedly as possible. It's nice to see folks here from all over, including our friends from Quebec as well. One of the things that I think is interesting is if Maine does say no, what will happen next? You know, it's my understanding that Massachusetts does have these other options. One of those would go through Vermont. That line would be buried. It wouldn't require a clear cut, but would be buried underneath existing roadways and under the lake bed of Lake Champlain. And it would also be almost 3 times the tangible benefit to the host state. So that proposal, again, third in Massachusetts bid stack, as I understand it, is really a lot less controversial in the state. It has the support of folks in the state of Vermont, the municipalities along the way. And you know, I think the fact that no trees are cut and it's under existing roadways and it has more benefits is a big part of the reason why. There will be sacrifices that we all need to make as part of this clean energy future. And I think really it's a matter of, you know, sharing in those sacrifices and also in the benefits of the opportunities going forward for job creation, for new tangible benefits from projects like this. And another thing that Maine is also really looking at hard is, you know, what are the opportunities for more renewable generation in Maine that can create jobs in our state to serve, you know, the rest of the region. You know, we're very bullish on solar right now. There's a huge boom there. And we're also very bullish on offshore wind. The Gulf of Maine, as you all know, is a massive opportunity for, you know, if we harnessed all of it, about 150 nuclear power plants worth of offshore wind. Obviously, we won't do all of that, and we need to respect the fisheries, and there will be trade-offs there as well. So I hope that gives you just a quick lay of the land. I'm happy to discuss, try to answer questions as best I can if there's time for discussion.
Thank you very much, Seth. Are you going to be able to hang around with us?
I can, yes. The cell phone gods permitting, of course.
Good, and congratulations on the college trip. I always enjoyed that, but they're a little emotional at times. So,
yes, very much so. That's
yeah.
right.
Next, we'll go to New Hampshire State Rep Suzanne Smith. Representative Smith will discuss the Northern Pass, and I think when we get into questions and answers, perhaps we can talk to both Rep Suzanne and Seth about, you know, the transmission and the differences about, you know, what's achievable actually through those initiatives. So let me see if I can find. Do I have Suzanne Smith?
Yep, I'm on. You can
are.
hear me, right?
I can hear and see you. Thank you so much for joining us, and good morning to you.
It's good to be here, and thank you, Seth, for that description of what's going on in Maine. And thanks to Rona and the CSG team and everyone who's put this together. It's been really good. First of all, I want a little background. New Hampshire is a small state, a lot smaller than Maine. We have 1.3 million people. And more than 2/5 of New Hampshire's household rely on fuel oil as primary heating. And in 2016, New Hampshire generated more electricity from wind than from coal for the first time, but we still have two coal plants operating, I believe the only 2 in New England. And New Hampshire gets over 60% of our electricity from Seabrook Nuclear Power Plant. And solar and wind provide about 17% of the power. This is as of 2 years ago. And it seems that the growth of these 2 industries has been slow compared to our neighbors in Vermont, especially, and also Massachusetts. So the final decision on energy and transmission projects in New Hampshire is the Site Evaluation Committee. And the Site Evaluation Committee was revamped about 12 or 13 years ago. And it requires that any large project, which are the ones that go through the Site Evaluation Committee, hold public hearings before they file their applications so they can get a feel of what the people in their areas are interested in and what they're worried about. And also they can answer questions from the public so that we're starting out on a more level playing field and that people are not blindsided. And in order for the Site Evaluation Committee to approve projects, there are 4 criteria that need to be met, 4 or 5. And those criteria are such as it won't interfere with the orderly development of the region, and the company can have the economic and technology ability to do the project. So the Northern Pass project was initially proposed in 2010. It was going to wind from the Canadian border down to southern New Hampshire for power to be transmitted through the lines to Massachusetts and Connecticut, because and none of the power was going to come to New Hampshire, which immediately got a lot of people upset. It was a 192-mile route, and the towers were going to be 90 to 120 feet high, go through the White Mountain National Forest, go through the city of Concord, our capital city, 140-foot towers, and also through some of the most touristed areas of the state. And tourism is pretty much our #1 moneymaker in New Hampshire. So there was a lot of opposition from the beginning, and it was fierce. And tourism, the placement of the towers, and that it was not needed for system reliability, aka ISO New England, and it was not going to be used in Vermont. So after 10 years, the Site Evaluation Committee determined that Northern Pass did not meet the needed criteria, and the project was shut down. The developer took that case to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled unanimously that they had not done their homework, they had not communicated well with people, and the project was not a go. So it was very interesting process, and I think that there were a lot of questions and ideas given by people who were opposed to the project as proposed, that it may have passed if they had done their homework and communicated with the communities and the people, rather than assuming that they were going to be able to do it without working with communities. They would make a decision, then they would go to the community and say, okay, we're going to run this through the town that I represent. The lines were going to go right through the middle of town. They were going to bury them, but the town was going to be torn up for a year to do that. So those were the kind of issues that were happening in that. So there are people who are concerned about renewables in New Hampshire. We have people who fight wind. We have people who fight solar on the basis of what's going to happen when the solar panels are not, when they outlive their life and we don't have a way to recycle them. So it's really challenging. We have the NIMBY, but then we also have valid concerns, which I think can be addressed. So I think better communication, Northern Pass might have gotten somewhere. And I will say that midway through the process, Liberty Utilities, which owns the already existing line, which runs from Hydro-Quebec through New Hampshire, had plenty of room on their towers to add more energy. And they were proposing a 275 kilovolt addition to those wires, which would pretty much have made Northern Pass not even needed anymore. So it's a challenge, but I think the processes are working. And I honor the people in Maine who are trying to do their homework and get things done. And I have also looked at the projects in Vermont and New York, going down through the rivers and the lakes there. So, but that's kind of the Northern Pass project in a nutshell, 10 years.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. So that'll be good, I think, conversation fodder here as we move into the next phase. We have about 25 minutes or so before the program is to finish at 11:30. I thank everyone for their participation so far. I did put in something in the chat asking if you'd like to raise your hand. You'll find that on the bottom of the screen. I think if you hit the participant button there, the opportunity to raise your technical hand will exist and you can join in the conversation. So that being said, is there anybody that has raised their hand, Rona, that you can see that I think there may end up to be a list here for me, but I haven't seen it. So
No, I don't see one yet. And just to clarify, click on the reaction button and raise hand will pop up. And you just click on raise hand if you have a question.
okay.
And I see Representative Carrie Dolan has a hand raised.
All right. Go right ahead, Representative.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. I'm a representative from the state of Vermont and very interested to know a bit more about the criteria that New Hampshire has used to evaluate those projects. We too have a set of criteria we use, but it would be helpful to look at both New Hampshire and perhaps Maine's criteria to ensure that we're providing adequate review when the time comes for us to be evaluating projects such as the ones you are describing today.
Carrie, I can give you a brief overview and then I can email you a link to the section of the law which lists everything, but it's maintaining a balance between the environment and need for new energy facilities, that they're avoiding undue delay in construction and give timely consideration to environmental consequences, ensure all entities planning to construct have the technical and monetary ability to do the project, and that it does not interfere with the orderly development of the area, which includes land use planning, environmental, economic, and technical issues are resolved. So that's kind of a big overview, but I can send that to you.
I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure.
And I think Maine's are pretty similar. Yeah, we have, there are basically three entities: the Public Utilities Commission, which looks at the impact of the grid, the Department of Environmental Protection, looking at sort of overall environmental impact, and then finally the Land Use Planning Commission, which deals with the unorganized territories of Maine, where there isn't a municipal permitting authority. And interestingly, if a project is granted a CPCN, a Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity, by the Public Utilities Commission, then that project is able to override municipal permitting authorities under Maine law. So that was the cause of some consternation where the decision by the PUC, which wasn't entirely trusted by the affected municipalities, essentially took away powers. That caused one other point that I just would mention is that our Public Utilities Commission it did look at the regional greenhouse gas impact of the project. So, will this reduce carbon emissions on the New England grid? But it did not look, interestingly, at the global greenhouse gas impact. So if you're diverting, an existing source of renewables to another region, what are you accomplishing? Are you in fact displacing more fossil fuels in the region that will receive the power than will have to come online to backfill the power that's lost from the source region? And of course, you have to consider line loss and other factors as well. So that's just one thing I want to flag that our PUC did not consider.
Oops.
We got, you're going in and out on us a little bit. So I think we got 99% of what you shared with us, but there was a little blanking in and out. So thank you for that. The next, we do have representative from Vermont. I'll call him Representative Mike until he tells me how to correctly pronounce his name. Looks like he's got his hand raised as well.
Yeah,
Mike.
thank you, Senator Formica. Yes, Yantashka. So anyway, my comment or question is, with wind and solar being intermittent, dependent on the weather and everything, we have a need for baseload power to be able to provide the electricity when those renewable sources are not working. And hydro is a source of baseload power. But I'm wondering if there's going to be more reliance on natural gas, and whether nuclear will continue to be a source of baseload power through Seabrook in the New England grid.
So, Mike, I guess I'll answer that. We only have natural gas in the very southern part of New Hampshire, and that is because it's being shipped from elsewhere. We do not really have natural gas capability here. We do have a lot of small hydro plants. I mean, not very, not as big as the HQ hydro that would be coming, that power that would be coming from Canada. But we do have a number of our rivers that do produce hydroelectric. And we have a pretty fair amount of power coming from hydroelectric. I think it's like 15 or 17% of the power comes from that. And then also in the future, I expect we're going to have battery storage capability for solar so that it will not be as reliant on the power of the sun every minute of the day to do it. And we're looking also into offshore wind, which then, because the wind does blow day and night, can help a lot. We only have 17 miles of coastline, but we are working with other states on that. We have a couple of commissions going, studying it.
Mike, let me ask Greg to jump in on that too. If you could talk a little bit about the makeup of baseload versus the renewable, the intermittency of it in his modeling.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, so one of the things we've learned from digging through, a lot of meteorological data is that there's usually, there's usually some resource available. And so if you have the right grid and you have the right diversity of resources, it really reduces the amount of time that you need to rely on, a resource like natural gas or nuclear. And I say it reduces the time you need to rely on that. There could be, you could imagine scenarios where you still have quite a bit of gas around, and maybe that gas doesn't produce as much energy, but is still available for those peak hours. So that's one option. Definitely that diversity of resources and transmission reduces the need for that. But there's a couple different options from there. And then, of course, storage could be a potential option. And you asked about nuclear also. In our particular study, the model did not build any new nuclear due to costs. But you could imagine a scenario where there's, technology breakthroughs and small modular reactors and things like that, where, the costs might eventually come low enough that nuclear would be a reasonable cost option for providing both energy and capacity to the grid. So it would provide that reliable capacity to the grid.
Yeah, Connecticut is dependent on, and was counting on that Northern Pass opportunity to, as we're a little island of electricity here, depending on transmission from natural gas to our west and nuclear. And when that was being threatened, our baseload was being threatened. And I was interested to hear that additional capacity on existing infrastructure, to Suzanne's point, might have been available with the owner of the utility to eliminate the need for the Northern Pass. I found that interesting as a comment. But as we phase out of natural gas, one way or the other, and you hear rumblings of the current administration talking about fracking and the problems with that, and perhaps backing off natural gas regarding that, and nuclear having all kinds of struggles to compete with the natural gas fracking. In 2050, your conversation that you mentioned, Greg, talked about a significant increase in need for power over the current need today. And given all these combinations, is are you feel comfortable that with your studies that we'll be able to provide the power as we more and more use electric everything?
Yeah, so that's one of the things we looked at with our study, and we didn't run the electrification scenario to the ground as much as I would have liked to, and I generally agree with Representative Barry's comment, that we have to do this to reach any of these more aggressive targets in terms of economy-wide carbon reductions. That being said, the biggest challenge I see, and I'm talking kind of personally here, just from having looked at the data, but the biggest challenge I see is just getting all this stuff installed. All this, the wind, the solar, everything that we're going to be, that's going to be generating power has to have somewhere to go. And so that's one of the biggest challenges I see. I feel like the grid questions can be solved.
Yeah. The aging infrastructure and the modernization of the grid needs to happen, number one, certainly on our way to 2030 and 2050. It's going to be a significant cost. And we have New London in Connecticut, which is a great port available for offshore wind. I wore my offshore wind pin here today, and I also have my fish tie on. So I'm trying to represent and respect all the industries involved. It's going to be, there's going to be some challenges to transition over. And if we're struggling with baseload, if nuclear can't compete and natural gas doesn't get here, Connecticut is 45 in percent of supply of electricity really with those two resources. So, we're going to have to develop this. And you talked a little bit about storage, but storage is at a 2 to 4 to 6 hour capacity to my mind, and is what's the time range for introducing grid scale storage or residential commercial storage into this process to try to help us through it?
Yeah, so
I'd also like to say that Vermont is still open to the TDI project, which will bring baseload power from Hydro-Quebec down through Lake Champlain and across Vermont. So
yeah,
keep that in mind.
Yeah. Well, we were hoping for Hydro-Quebec to send some stuff down, but when the first initiative didn't pass, I think that stopped. But Greg, I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
I was going to comment that on the storage question, the 2, 4, and 6 hour storage can actually provide a lot of reliable capacity to the grid, when mixed with a diverse set of resources. We see in scenarios that have a lot of solar generation that even having 2 hours of battery at the end of the day can help get you past that, the peak demand and the peak net demand on the grid. And so that you can get a lot of reliable capacity from that. Obviously, the more 2 hour storage you install, eventually you'll sort of saturate that, and you'll need the 4 hour storage. You'll need the 6 hour storage. Eventually, you'll need even longer than that if you want to retire most or all of your, natural gas and nuclear resources. But you can definitely get something from the storage, and you can get something from the transmission. As the more you can share and exchange diversity between regions, the more reliable capacity you can tap into. But the hydropower, the reliable capacity of the hydropower and the contribution towards that planning reserve is definitely a very valuable tool in terms of reaching these levels of carbon mitigation.
Yeah, I'm somewhat hopeful for small modular reactors. We have Millstone in my district here, and we heard about Seabrook. And, I think the future for that is, on that site, because they already have the storage, lined up and sitting there. And, until we deal with a national storage problem that we've been kind of facing for a few decades.
Yeah.
I think we're going to have to look at that. But, anyone else? Senator Pacheco?
Yes, hi, Senator Feinstein. Greg, one of the things that you talked about relative to the study as a whole, that we could, make in the North American study, that you're talking about numbers up in the high 90 percentiles of getting decarbonization implemented. In a lot of the newer technologies that were online in terms of the extreme changes that we've seen in terms of cost, you referenced that some of that was baked into to the study. But things like the cost of carbon to our regional healthcare system, for example, that was not factored in correctly. I mean, that wasn't factored in, correct?
Correct. That was not factored in.
So when you start to add the cost of carbon, now you see a real reduction in terms of costs for the entire part of North America. So I'm encouraged by the results of the study, and knowing that some of this, as you said, you started back in 2016.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah, so that, some of this is probably a little dated as well now. Is there any opportunity for people to take, or are there other entities, or maybe your organization that is looking at where you are now and augmenting that study, the base data that's there, and looking at the cost of carbon? And also, final question is, to the extent that you looked at energy efficiency as part of the, in the built environment in particular, bringing down the base load needs for North America.
Yeah, so I'll take the last question first. Yeah, we're definitely interested in studying efficiency in more detail. A lot of our electrification scenarios assume that as different end uses in different industries electrify, that there will be some sort of natural efficiencies that will come along with that. For example, especially in the Northeast, transitioning from fossil fuel heating sources at residential and commercial places, transitioning to heat pumps as opposed to resistance heating. And I know there's some relatively new heat pump technology that can keep you warm at much lower temperatures than used to exist. So those types of things are often considered in our study, and definitely potential options for for reducing the overall energy need, as we're also electrifying that need. So that's something that we're definitely looking into, and kind of hoping to understand in more detail as some of those technologies evolve. And I didn't write down your first question, but if you want to respond to that first.
Yeah, no, just wanted to say that we'd love to share with you some of the data we're looking at here in Massachusetts, where we've got legislation filed in this session called Building Justice with Jobs, to really take a look at 1 million homes, 1 million pieces of our built infrastructure, trying to do 100,000 a year, complete rehabilitation, in particular in those areas where environmental justice areas throughout the Commonwealth, and just really going down right to switching out gas, oil heating systems, going over to heat pumps, as you just talked about, going through and making sure the properties are totally insulated, being as energy efficient as possible. And in some cases, we're getting numbers coming back on the estimates where we can get up to 70 and 80% efficiency. These are amazing numbers. Of course, some of the properties that we're talking about doing over practically had no energy efficiency built when the properties were built. back in the 20s and 30s and 50s, etc. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity in North America for investing in something that has always been a bipartisan effort, and that's energy efficiency, bringing down demand, which helps us with the electrification that will be needed in helping us work together, I think, regionally as well with the transportation sector. There's ways that we can be putting out some joint bids, for example, in recycling our fleets so that we can bring down carbon emissions as well. Of course, we have to build those. We have to build those, charging stations, and we also have to figure out a way to work together to have a grid that works for all of us. So, just wanted to get your reaction and make sure it wasn't built into the study, because these are opportunities, if they weren't built into the study, that really can, with just a little tweaking, I'm hopeful we can meet that net zero by 2050 that a lot of jurisdictions are going for now.
Yeah, we've definitely baked some of it in, but understanding that in more detail, I think, is important for stakeholders.
And it would seem to me that, Greg, this is not a one and done study. You're probably going to be working on this and tweaking this as time moves on. And that's my guess. And maybe you could put your contact information or where we can find your study. I think if we type in, the North American Renewable Integration Study, and Mr. Google will send us, the report. But
yeah, certainly. And there's a website kind of landing page that'll direct you to all the other spots. And there is a link in the presentation. So when Rona posts that, that might be a good, and I believe someone posted it in the chat also when I was having trouble with the animation. But yes, we definitely have some follow-on work. It might not be called the North American Renewable Integration Study, but it'll use some of these same data and methods and start, digging to a more sophisticated level of detail in terms of understanding, how the future grid could operate in extreme events. Climate change impacts, I think, could be really significant in terms of some of these questions about balancing. So I'm interested in that also.
yeah, a lot of work to do. Representative Berry, you raised your hand. I'm not sure if I got to you. I have about 1 minute or 2 minutes left. Did you want to add or subtract something?
All said. No, I think the question about storage and efficiency is fascinating and probably deserves a whole, maybe 2 additional meetings. But there's no question that storage is a big piece of the solution. I do want to highlight that it's more than just battery storage. There are other ways of storing energy, including the molecule, and we can talk more about that at another time as well. But Maine, it does have a significant amount of base load also, which is biomass. And there's no question that we will need base load going forward. And I think that is a compelling argument for some of this hydro to be entering the grid somewhere, somehow. So really appreciate the discussion today, and put my phone number in the chat. Happy to talk with folks if anyone's inclined.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Greg, for the presentation, and all of you for joining us. I think that it might make sense as we, under the great work here, this committee and CSG, to just keep this conversation going in many ways that we can. Zoom, maybe we can try to gather everybody in a format that might be, a forum of sorts, similar to what we did in New Haven a little bit ago, and really have a strong conversation, because these things are not going away and demand more of our attention. So I want to thank everybody for their participation today. I want to thank again Rona and the team, and make sure you hang around at 12 o'clock to 1:30. The plenary session is the great disruption. Rethinking Energy, Transportation, Food, and Agriculture, moderated by my good friend, Senator Pacheco. And it is Tony Seba, a noted author, educator, and co-founder of Rethink X. So thank you, Greg, once again, and thank you, everybody. And I look forward to seeing everybody at 12 o'clock today. And please enjoy the rest of this CSG initiative that's going on over the next few days. There's plenty of interesting conversations to be had. And thank you for all your good work. Serving in politics is not an easy profession and not an easy labor of love, but together we can make a difference. So thank you and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you all.